So just to save time, I know all the speakers have been introduced before because they've been playing a number of roles in the program. I'm going to introduce Bertrand at the end after the rest of the speakers go because he's going to share some closing remarks with us. But why don't we start out with Mark, if you will. Please. Whatever you're more comfortable doing.
If this is working? I'll do it from here. So I found myself in a quandary. I wanted to announce some sort of commitment, but to be honest, there was so much going on, I'm not quite ready to say, I'm not confident that I know yet what we can commit to. So I'm going to commit to commit. And say that, and both Alex Thier, who was with us earlier from our policy planning and learning shop, have spoken, and we'll take this on a bit, and some colleagues like Katie Taylor and others to think through what we might do on a policy level or a learning level. USAID did give us some funding. Our human capital and our HR team gave my office a grant this year to do training in the agency on this whole faith literacy idea that's up there, and so we'll have that. And that's also part of the U.S. interagency plan for global religious leader and faith community engagement as well. So that's a piece of what we're thinking about. So I think some of the stuff is already cooking. But we'll come back, and I promise, we'll communicate back through what we can commit to. So I'm committing to commit. A couple takeaways I just wanted to come off with as well. When Adam said a spirit of collaboration, I think that's exactly right. There was also a spirit of cash, and that's also, I think, important to make this happen. That there were contributors, not just the people in this dais right now, but the people that have been on the different groups, the NGOs, and it wouldn't have happened without that as well. And I think that's real important. I really heard from folks about the geographic makeup of the room and where we had gaps and where we can do better, and that's something that's in my mind personally, and so I'm grateful for that, both geographically and linguistically and in different groups. So thank you for those who have raised that very much. It also struck me, Adam said it, so terrific that you said it, but the print up there says, faith literacy. I do think there's also government agency literacy needed as well in terms of what to happen. I don't want to pick on Bruce from CMMB, but we'll need a constitutional amendment to have a preferential option for faith-based groups in the United States. And so that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Maybe 2 days after the Messiah comes back at some point. So anyway, I would just leave there some key takeaways, I think, that we're going to struggle with, and I promise that USAID is going to be part of the struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for the past 2.5 days, for the constructive engagement, and a special thanks to Jean and the team that have been working with her to make sure this has been such a wonderful meeting. If you're like me, you came here to learn. You came here to be challenged, and you came here to be inspired. What I can share with you is I have achieved all 3 objectives, and I hope you feel the same way too. Last night when we were having the dinner and Dr. Kim spoke, he summarized it all for me. He said we need prophetic voices to inspire us, and we need evidence to lead the way. That for me was a summary of everything. Prophetic voices, because not only is it core to our humanity, but also those are the ones that actually make our work, even the seemingly impossible, becoming possible. So let's not forget why we do this. The evidence piece, lots of data, lots of information in the last 2.5 days. Wonderful, wonderful evidence. Depending on where you sit in the spectrum, you are happy because you know there's evidence, highly rigorous evidence. Others may say, yeah, not so much. So from where I sit, is more of doing the gold standards as best as we can, the randomized controlled trials, doing them very well whenever possible, doing so. But also making sure the anecdotes, we don't lose them. Because I was very touched by the story from Sierra Leone, where the children, that have survived Ebola, the struggles they were going through with their auntie. That was touching. So we need to do both. The RCTs, the gold standards are wonderful because if we're able to do them, you cannot ignore that evidence. It cannot be ignored because it is good. But let's also remember that we need to be able to come up with those anecdotes, as well, because they're very, very important. From a commitment standpoint, Jean and the group, you can count on World Vision. And the work that we did recently at the table in terms of coming up with indicators of transformation, we're very much committed to that because we had done some work on transformational development. And so we will be more than willing to be able to contribute and share with that journey to make sure that at least we can come up with those indicators. As we go forward, there's going to be a need for some kind of a research framework to be able to drill down some of the core questions that we don't have answers to. There also you have World Vision's commitment because we will make space in our own programming area using our reach and within our own learning centers so that we can all work together to make sure that this journey is much, much better than we all started. So thank you very much.
All right. This is actually incredibly emotional for me, so I'm going to do my best not to break out in tears because I know that freaks people out tremendously. But I just want you to know that it's never that simple to convene a group of people of faith from different parts of the world and somehow not to be incredibly moved by it, especially if one understands that faith is very central and foundational to our respective lives. Having said that, in 2008, October, UNFPA convened 10 UN agencies and about 250 faith-based partners from around the world, every single country. The reason I know that is because we had to hire approximately 30 translators. And it was for at least 6 languages. And it was an incredibly rich gathering of faith-based partners. And a whole range of areas were discussed, like today, gender-based violence, youth, gender equality, migration, you name it. It was all being there, humanitarian settings, etc. This was also the time that Jean came on board our work in interfaith engagement. And a network of faith-based actors was launched. It was called the Global Interfaith Network for Population and Development. Looking back, 2008, now we're 2015, plenty has happened, at least in the international system, so to speak. We have, I think, moved the pendulum effectively together. We meaning the international development world, secular and faith-based. I think we've managed to move the pendulum quite a bit to a place in 2008 where if the term prophetic voices was mentioned, and it was, a good number of my UN colleagues literally felt, you could see them shrink inside the bodies. Whereas now I think we all sort of took it for granted. I didn't see anybody shrink. And I think there's already a shift in the mental awareness then that has happened tremendously from just 2008 to 2015. One of the things that I felt most appreciative of doing this journey in the UN system with our faith-based partners is that we're much better, we're farther ahead than where we thought we were going to be, but we are still talking about bridging conceptually this notion of human rights, which is for some reason seen as a thoroughly secular enterprise, even though it took a whole bunch of faith leaders from all over the world together with everybody else to help develop them, but we conveniently forget that. So there's this secular paradigm of human rights, and then there is this faith-based and multiple faith narratives that come together to inform. And I think we will continue to be challenged in a positive way by bridging those ways of thinking and paradigms. For many of my human rights colleagues, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is all the legitimacy, all the religion they need. That's it, it's all there. And there's a very strong, almost fundamentalist appreciation of that. It's a sacred text. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is, quote-unquote, a sacred text for many of them. And I think it's important for us in this room, because we are all pretty much converted, but it is important to remember that there is the rest of that world out there that still feels very strongly that the secular paradigm of human rights is all that we need, really, and everybody should adhere to that. And it's fine, we need it, of course we need it, but it's that bridging that I think we need to continue to walk with each other on that journey, bridging those different paradigms, because they're not really fundamentally that different. And you, in fact, many of the faith-based partners around here, you've demonstrated how they are lived in reality. There isn't that much difference. But I just want us to bear that in mind. And last but by no means least, I wanted to share that I think, far from being able to commit to anything, I think in the UN system we've put together a lot of the research and the documentation and the guidelines and the strategies, and we have the training courses for the UN and for the faith-based partners. We've done plenty, but I think what has happened here today, by virtue of this being held in the auspices and under the auspices of the World Bank, I think we've literally been able to say it's now, this engagement with faith-based partners is the new normal. I wrote an article about that a couple of days ago saying, you know what, it's the new normal. It isn't going to be that difficult anymore, because what we can easily say within the UN, and my UNICEF colleagues can always correct me if they're still here, is, you know what, if the World Bank can do it, it's perfectly kosher. And that's precisely the power of institutions such as this. And I want to thank Adam and Jean, and certainly Bertrand and Dr. Kim for enabling that legitimacy, finally, for giving that stamp that will only add to the value of the new normal. And I hope that we can carry that journey forward together. Thank you.
I haven't met all of you yet, so I wanted to flag. A couple of my colleagues have been dropping in and out. So you've had Phil Stevens and Dave Beer from my team here in the UK delegation of the World Bank. We're also all here on behalf of the UK Department for International Development. So before I was here, I was in DFID in Bangladesh and in Malawi. September, I returned to DFID. So I'm not sure who I'm making commitments on behalf of, maybe both, maybe on behalf of myself as well. And talking to Phil and Dave about the discussions they joined, and I sat in earlier to watch you talking about commitments and next steps. I go to a lot of conferences, and I was really struck that there's a real honesty in this room and a real practicality about how we move forward. And I think that's very, very important, and it's nice to see. It's too often these things become a set piece, and to my colleagues as well, speaking so frankly, so I'm going to do the same. I think this kind of conference is really helpful, as others have said, to get past perceived divides and to build those bridges and to focus on our shared understandings, because that's what matters at the end of the day. And looking ahead, thinking about the new SDGs, the post-2015 framework, it's a really core principle there that these are the goals for everywhere in the country, not just for developing countries. They apply to the UK. And believe me, that encourages some interesting conversations in London when you think about all sorts of issues. So I think we have to come together and think about this. I particularly like in the recommendations the focus on evidence, on showing what works. I'm a development professional for nearly 20 years, and to me that's what's most convincing. It's not where somebody comes from, what group they represent. Show me things that work. Show me new ways to address challenges that we haven't got past, like working in fragile states, like dealing with some of the toughest challenges of excluded communities, and I'm up for it, whoever that comes from. I'm an atheist. I'm not a person of faith. But that doesn't matter. I'm passionate about development, and I am interested fundamentally in things that work and how we can work together. DFID in the UK has already got a working group trying to think how we do more on this. When I go back in September, I'm going to engage a lot with that to think about how in my area of work on the international side we can do more of this. I've seen myself in Malawi and Bangladesh. I've seen great examples. I've seen less good examples, worrying examples, and I've seen missed opportunities. And to me, it's the missed opportunities where we really need to try harder. So that's my commitment, to go back, try and build on the lessons, learn from all of you where things can make a difference, help us fill those gaps we haven't quite got right, and let's work on this together because we're all fundamentally passionate about development. Thank you.
Great. As a representative of a private foundation, I said at the Tuesday opening session that we can often, while not the biggest funder, we can bring a nimble layer of funding to support this sort of work. And that means we can act a little quicker and be a little more responsive at times. So I'm going to use 60 seconds to speak for 3 to 5 minutes. There are two things I just want to get across quickly. One is that we'll continue to support and fund work that pushes the boundaries of what we've been discussing the last few days, work like NIFA is doing in Nigeria, like CRS is doing with the Coast Interfaith Council of Clerics in Kenya on child marriage, and bringing strong evidence that also is authentic and engages religious voices and as true partners in that work. Second is that as a partner to institutions, funders, we hope that we can help you bridge the gap. We're working closely with USAID on a number of issues, and invite other funders to think with us about how we can be useful to the effort to bring this faith literacy and practical solutions to the rest of the world. So thank you.
What I really liked about this conference was that it wasn't a World Bank conference or a JLI conference or a BMZ conference. It was a joint conference, and I think this is a really important signal. And we have here at the stage so many organizations, and I think it's a strong signal that religion matters. And as Asa said, it's not a thing of one organization, it's really a thing of the whole donor community. And Germany, as one of the biggest donors, will certainly take this forward. And so here are two things that I took from this conference, and I think Adam started from Mark because he knew he would make a commitment, so I tried to do a commitment for the German government. So what I learned first is that we have to start with ourselves as a donor. We have to start to listen to faith-based organizations. And to be honest, sometimes I got the impression at this conference as well that sometimes, you know, the faith leaders are taught by the donors how they should change, how they should adapt. And I think that's what I personally took. We should step back as a donor and just listen. And this gives us a chance to think different about development. I think we as donors also have to change the way we think about development. It's not just about financial and technical aspects, it's about values. And this is why, and this is my first commitment, we at BMZ and for the German Development Corporation, we will start a program to increase religious literacy within our organization. We'll look at the training for our colleagues who work in the field at the embassies, and I think this is really important. And the second thing I learned is that we already made the case why religion matters, and that we now have to take action. And this again is something where we want to start with ourselves, and this is to change policy. And so here's the second commitment. Until the end of this year, we at BMZ will develop a new strategy on development and religion, and this will be the first strategy in our history. And it will not just be a principle paper, it will be a concise strategy. You know, we Germans always try to make a proper plan and then implement it. And we will take on you know, many things that were discussed here. That is, how do we have to change our programming? How do we come up with criteria for funding? How do we change our funding? How do we come up with new forms of cooperation? And this will all be in that strategy. And I think the goal is to reach the SDGs. So we should all focus our efforts on the SDGs because this is our common goal. So what I also take home from this conference is that we don't just need the faith-based organizations for implementation, but also for policy development. And we started last year by establishing a group that is helping us at the ministry to think about our strategies. And we involved all kind of religious leaders in that group, and that group will work together with me and my colleagues from GIZ on that strategy. So we will involve them in the policy making and not just in the implementation. And then we will even go a step further, and next year in 2017, we will have pilots, concrete projects in our partner countries where we test this strategy. And finally, I think it's very important. This conference was a very important step forward. And I think we need to meet again and have a follow-up on this conference. And I really want to invite all of you to Berlin next year, mid of February. We will have a huge conference on religion and development in Berlin. And we will build on this conference and take things forward. So thank you very much.
Just very quickly, if I may, I would like to make a couple of commitments on behalf of the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities. Most practically speaking, we will commit, and we are able to commit as a result of a grant from DFID, to follow through on the work of this conference with a set of proceedings and with a number of papers and online resources, which we will be getting out to you over the coming weeks. We commit to continue to encourage you to join the learning hubs, and within our own organization, we commit to, as the JLI expands and changes its role, to looking at our structure and our governance to see how best to continue to serve. We commit to being open to serving this work going forward and to listening to what is asked of us. And finally, we commit to giving Helena Mangera some serious time off. Would you stand and be acknowledged, please, Helena? Thank you so much.
So I now have the distinct honor to introduce our closing speaker for this entire Religion and Sustainable Development Conference, Bertrand Badre. He is the Managing Director and Chief Financial Officer here at the World Bank. I'm really grateful he was able to join us for a big chunk of this session, to be able to listen to the recommendations, hear from some of the other co-hosts, and he's going to share with us some of his own insights and his own perspective about the ongoing work of the World Bank in supporting stronger partnerships. Bertrand has a very accomplished career in banking, and one of the recurring themes in this conference has been a preferential option for the poor, and I believe he's really tried to apply that in the area of finance and development, and we're extremely grateful to have you close, Bertrand. It's up to you.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's my responsibility, I think, is pretty tough. I have to bring everybody back into the atmosphere, and it's a difficult landing after these 2.5 days. It is and it has been a pleasure to join you for this last minute of this last hour of this last day of your conference. I regret I've not been able to participate more, although I really enjoyed to share the dinner, the Ramadan Iftar dinner yesterday. I probably might not be as inspired as the speaker I heard yesterday and today, but I really appreciated to hear what some of you have called prophetic voices, referring to Jim Kim. And what is interesting is not only prophetic voices, it's prophetic voices mixed with a strategy, which is something more special. And I think it's very important, because after what we've been through in the past few years, I mean, we've been through, and to a certain extent, we are still in the midst of a global financial crisis, which has basically set the fire to the planet in many respects. We've tried to kind of, I would say, control the fire by using liquidity, which is a flood now. And we have to reconstruct the whole thing. We have to reconstruct the system. And you cannot reconstruct without being prophetic. but without also having a strategy. And I think that's what I've heard here, and I'm very, very happy to be here. And Adam knows how important it is for me to take this into account. And I think we have collectively a responsibility to rebuild something, to strengthen the foundation of a system, and we have to do this together. So from what I've heard from this closing reflection, this conference has generated a remarkable wealth of knowledge and practical recommendation. They are all aimed at building more effective partnerships. I come back to that very important word, partnership between development institutions and faith-inspired organizations in ways that build on shared values, recognize our respective roles, and harness our respective strengths. On behalf of the World Bank Group, I want to thank again the conference co-host, co-sponsored, and all of you for dedicating so much time to engage in this candid and constructive dialogue. No single conference, and we know this in this room, can unpack and solve all of the challenges and barriers associated with building more effective partnerships. But I hope you will leave feeling encouraged and resolute about acting on many of the recommendations, both individually and collectively where possible. We can commit, to use your word, but I think it's important to commit. As President Kim said at the start of this conference, the world has made remarkable progress in lifting 1 billion people out of poverty since 1990. This has been achieved in part due to the relief and development effort of your organizations. Astounding progress has been made in reducing extreme poverty globally over the last 25 years, from nearly 2 billion people 25 years ago to fewer than 1 billion today. But it's not over. We all must do more, and more can we do. The turning point will be more effective partnerships, including in the area of finance, which I know best. I have really one conviction that I want to share with you today. The problems that we are facing, the problems that the world is facing today are very complex and very big, probably more complex and bigger than ever. And I do believe that nobody can tackle this problem alone. It's a temptation. Everybody wants to be self-centered. Everybody wants to know, I have the solution, I can do my things. It's not what we need. It's not working this way. We need partnership. True partnership, which means recognizing each other as true partners. It's not just a nice word. It's not just a kind of silver bullet. It's not just a mantra. It's not just politically correct to say partnership. I think it's a necessity. I think we must join our hands, as somebody said yesterday. But we must join more than our hands. We must join our hearts. And I'm a finance guy, so believe me, it's important. I leave on Saturday for the UN Financing for Development Conference in Addis. I believe this event represents a critical moment in this seminal year in which new sustainable development goals will be agreed to in September. Fortunately, the agenda this time is much broader than simply, although it simply is not that simply actually, strengthening the ODA. It includes a much greater emphasis on better leveraging private finance and mobilizing domestic resources. Faith actors will be important as a substantial source of inspiration, of course, but also as a substantial source of finance, in the spirit of cash, you say, in their own right. New partnership will be necessary to move the world from the billions available now to the trillions plus that will be needed to finance this agenda. In September, before the start of the UN General Assembly and the SDG Summit, I'm pleased to share that the World Bank Group is co-sponsoring an event in New York with the UN Interagency Task Force and engaging with faith-based organizations for sustainable development. This event will continue to discuss ways to operationalize greater collaboration and partnership building. Many of the more actionable recommendations from this conference can carry into September and beyond. Let me close on a more personal note, something people know, but I've never said publicly, at least in my professional capacity. I'm Catholic. I'm not proud of that, that's a fact. I'm Catholic. And I try to pray regularly, as regularly as possible. And I strongly believe that this has some connection with the fight against poverty, with the fight for universal health coverage, with access to financial freedom. These are the key reasons why I joined the World Bank. Sometimes I say I moved away from the dark side of finance. You say I was a banker, which is true, to the supposedly bright side of finance for the forgiveness of my sins, maybe. But the truth is that it's not new. 20 years ago, I was a young professional in the French Minister of Finance. I organized a seminar, and we published a book after that. In French, it was called La mondialisation a-t-elle une âme? Very difficult to translate into English, actually. I would say, is globalization inspired by somebody or someone or something? But it was really about questioning faith, spiritualities, and I mean the question that business and economic world raises. And this is something which is still very central to my belief and to my action. The financial abandonment of all groups of customers or even countries is not something that can be ignored in particular. The World Bank Group and its partners are coordinating efforts to prevent the loss of basic services needed to finance investment in some of the most vulnerable areas in the world. As the Pope reminds us in the recently launched encyclical, the earth and the poor are crying out. We need a new ethic that can undergird our economic system, the foundation I mentioned earlier. To eliminate extreme poverty, we must use all the evidence that we and others have gathered on what works to reduce poverty and put it into action. We need to build a global movement to galvanize supporters. Faith-inspired organizations are essential for both. Collaborating together, partnering together, can improve development outcomes and ultimately achieve our common goal of a world free of poverty. Partnering with faith-based groups will allow us to combine technical approaches with a motivating power of hope. It's a pretty powerful combination, actually. Our hope, my hope, is that this event will not be a one-off event. My hope is that this will not be a conference where just great ideas are generated and commitments are made that quickly dissipate with the passage of time when we return to the traffic of our daily responsibility. Our hope and my hope is that this event inspires and motivates others to listen, to learn, and more importantly, to act. The World Bank Group is committed to being on this journey with you. I must say you offered me something very precious, a very rare, and a very unique moment. These type of moments, in particular in this building, in this room, are invaluable. And believe me again, I'm the CFO. So if I say it's invaluable, it's truly invaluable. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you very much. And keep going.
Thank you to Bertrand and to all of the co-hosts for your financial support, for your leadership support in making this happen. And I hope that you've been thanked. Why don't you thank all the participants who also made this conference possible and so rich. So with that, we are going to close this conference. We are going to build on many of the recommendations that were surfaced in your thematic groups. We will share a lot of the detailed technical recommendations that came out of all the sessions. We have a wealth of information to process and digest. We hope you'll be able to do that in your train and plane ride home or car ride, in my case. But really are committed to moving this forward and building the kind of effective and strategic partnerships that will enable us to enhance the contribution of faith actors in ending extreme poverty. So thank you for coming, and we wish you traveling mercies on your way home.